Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew Allen, and welcome back to What a Book. It's been a really long time. Uh, it's really nice to be doing this again, and we've got a story to finish. So, without further ado, let's get back to Twilight. Chapter 13 Confessions. Edward in the sunlight was shocking. I couldn't get used to it, though I'd been staring at him all afternoon. His skin, white despite the faint flush from yesterday's hunting trip, literally sparkled, like thousands of tiny diamonds were embedded in the surface. He lay perfectly still in the grass, his shirt open over his sculpted, incandescent chest, his scintillating arms bare. His glistening, pale lavender lids were shut, though of course he didn't sleep. A perfect statue carved in some unknown stone, smooth like marble, glittering like crystal. Now and then his lips would move, so fast it looked like they were trembling. But when I asked, he told me he was singing to himself. It was too low for me to hear. I enjoyed the sun, too, though the air wasn't quite dry enough for my taste. I would have liked to lie back, as he did, and let the sun warm my face, but I stayed curled up, my chin resting on my knees, unwilling to take my eyes off of him. The wind was gentle. It tangled my hair and ruffled the grass that swayed around his motionless form. The meadow, so spectacular to me at first, paled next to his magnificence. Hesitantly, always afraid, even now, that he would disappear like a mirage, too beautiful to be real. Hesitantly, I reached out one finger and stroked the back of his shimmering hand, where it lay within my reach. I marveled again at the perfect texture, satin smooth, cool as stone. When I looked up again, his eyes were open, watching me. Butterscotch today, lighter, warmer after hunting. His quick smile turned up the corners of his flawless lips. "I don't scare you?" he asked playfully, but I could hear the real curiosity in his soft voice. "No more than usual." He smiled wider. His teeth flashed in the sun. I inched closer, stretched out my whole hand now to trace the contours of his forearm with my fingertips. I saw that my fingers trembled, and knew it wouldn't escape his notice. "Do you mind?" I asked, for he had closed his eyes again. "No," he said without opening his eyes. "You can't imagine how that feels," he sighed. I lightly trailed my hand over the perfect muscles of his arm, followed the faint pattern of bluish veins inside the crease at his elbow. With my other hand, I reached to turn his hand over. Realizing what I wished, he flipped his palm up in one of those blindingly fast, disconcerting movements of his. It startled me. My fingers froze on his arm for a brief second. "Sorry," he murmured. I looked up in time to see his golden eyes close again. "It's too easy to be myself with you." I lifted his hand, turning it this way and that as I watched the sun glitter on his palm. I held it closer to my face, trying to see the hidden facets in his skin. "Tell me what you're thinking," he whispered. I looked to see his eyes watching me, suddenly intent. "It's still so strange for me, not knowing. You know the rest of us feel that way all the time. It's a hard life." Did I imagine the hint of regret in his tone? "But you didn't tell me." "I was wishing I could know what you were thinking." I hesitated. "And?" "I was wishing that I could believe that you were real, and I was wishing that I wasn't afraid." "I don't want you to be afraid." His voice was just a soft murmur. I heard what he couldn't truthfully say, that I didn't need to be afraid, that there was nothing to fear. "Well, that's not exactly the fear I meant, though that's certainly something to think about." So quickly that I missed his movement. He was half sitting, propped up on his right arm, his left palm still in my hands. His angel's face was only a few inches from mine. I might have, should have, flinched away from his unexpected closeness, but I was unable to move. His golden eyes mesmerized me. "What are you afraid of, then?" he whispered intently. But I couldn't answer. As I had just that once before, I smelled his cool breath in my face. Sweet, delicious. The scent made my mouth water. It was unlike anything else. Instinctively, unthinkingly, I leaned closer, inhaling. And he was gone. His hand ripped from mine. In the time it took my eyes to focus, he was 20 feet away, standing at the edge of the small meadow, in the deep shade of a huge fir tree. He stared at me, his eyes dark in the shadows, his expression unreadable. I could feel the hurt and shock on my face. My empty hands sunk. "I'm sorry, Edward," I whispered. I knew he could hear. "Give me a moment," he called, just loud enough for my less sensitive ears. I sat very still. After 10 incredibly long seconds, he walked back, slowly for him. He stopped, still several feet away, and sank gracefully to the ground, crossing his legs. His eyes never left mine. He took 2 deep breaths, and then smiled in apology. I'm so very sorry. He hesitated. Would you understand what I meant if I said I was only human? I nodded once, not quite able to smile at his joke. Adrenaline pulsed through my veins as the realization of danger slowly sank in. He could smell that from where he sat. His smile turned mocking. I'm the world's best predator, aren't I? Everything about me invites you in. My voice, my face, even my smell. As if I need any of that. Unexpectedly, he was on his feet, bounding away, instantly out of sight, only to appear beneath the same tree as before, having circled the meadow in half a second. As if you could outrun me, he laughed bitterly. He reached up with one hand and, with a deafening crack, effortlessly ripped a 2-foot thick branch from the trunk of the spruce. He balanced it in that hand for a moment, and then threw it with blinding speed, shattering it against another huge tree, which shook and trembled at the blow. And he was in front of me again, standing 2 feet away, still as a stone. As if you could fight me off, he said gently. I sat without moving, more frightened of him than I had ever been. I'd never seen him so completely freed of that carefully cultivated facade. He'd never been less human, or more beautiful. Face ashen, eyes wide, I sat like a bird locked in the eyes of a snake. His lovely eyes seemed to glow with rash excitement. Then, as the seconds passed, they dimmed. His expression slowly folded into a mask of ancient sadness. Don't be afraid, he murmured, his velvet voice unintentionally seductive. I promise. He hesitated. I swear not to hurt you. He seemed more concerned with convincing himself than me. Don't be afraid, he whispered again as he stepped closer, with exaggerated slowness. He sat sinuously with deliberately unhurried movements, till our faces were on the same level, just a foot apart. Please forgive me, he said formally. I can control myself. You caught me off guard, but I'm on my best behavior now. He waited, but I still couldn't speak. I'm not thirsty today, honestly. He winked. At that I had to laugh, though the sound was shaky and breathless. Are you all right? He asked tenderly, reaching out slowly, carefully, to place his marble hand back in mine. I looked at his smooth, cold hand, and then at his eyes. They were soft, repentant. I looked back at his hand, and then deliberately returned to tracing the lines in his hand with my fingertip. I looked up and smiled timidly. His answering smile was dazzling. So, where were we before I behaved so rudely? He asked in the gentle cadences of an earlier century. I honestly couldn't remember. He smiled, but his face was ashamed. I think we were talking about why you were afraid, besides the obvious reason. Oh, right. Well? I looked down at his hand and doodled aimlessly across his smooth, iridescent palm. The seconds ticked by. How easily frustrated I am, he sighed. I looked into his eyes, abruptly grasping that this was every bit as new to him as it was to me. As many years of unfathomable experience as he had, this was hard for him too. I took courage from that thought. I was afraid because, for, well, obvious reasons, I can't stay with you. And I'm afraid that I'd like to stay with you, much more than I should. I looked down at his hands as I spoke. It was difficult for me to say this aloud. Yes, he agreed slowly. That is something to be afraid of, indeed. Wanting to be with me. That's really not in your best interest. I frowned. I should have left long ago, he sighed. I should leave now, but I don't know if I can. I don't want you to leave, I mumbled pathetically, staring down again. Which is exactly why I should. But don't worry. I'm essentially a selfish creature. I crave your company too much to do what I should. I'm glad. Don't be. He withdrew his hand, more gently this time. His voice was harsher than usual. Harsh for him, still more beautiful than any human voice. It was hard to keep up. His sudden mood changes left me always a step behind, dazed. It's not only your company I crave. Never forget that. Never forget I am more dangerous to you than I am to anyone else. He stopped, and I looked to see him gazing unseeingly into the forest. I thought for a moment. I don't think I understand exactly what you mean, by that last part anyway, I said. He looked back at me and smiled, his mood shifting yet again. How do I explain? He mused, and without frightening you again. Without seeming to think about it, he placed his hand back in mine. I held it tightly in both of mine. He lit at our hands. That's amazingly pleasant. The warmth, he sighed. A moment passed as he assembled his thoughts. You know how everyone enjoys different flavors, he began. Some people love chocolate ice cream, others prefer strawberry. I nodded. Sorry about the food analogy. I couldn't think of another way to explain. I smiled. He smiled ruefully back. You see, every person smells different, has a different essence. If you locked an alcoholic in a room full of stale beer, he'd gladly drink it. But he could resist if he wished to, if he were a recovering alcoholic. Now let's say you placed in that room a glass of 100-year-old brandy, the rarest, finest cognac, and filled the room with its warm aroma. How do you think he would fare then? We sat silently, looking into each other's eyes, trying to read each other's thoughts. He broke the silence first. Maybe that's not the right comparison. Maybe it would be too easy to turn down the brandy. Perhaps I should have made our alcoholic a heroin addict instead. So what you're saying is I'm your brand of heroin? I teased, trying to lighten the mood. He smiled swiftly, seeming to appreciate my effort. Yes, you are exactly my brand of heroin. Does that happen often? I asked. He looked across the treetops, thinking through his response. I spoke to my brothers about it. He still stared into the distance. To Jasper, every one of you is much the same. He's the most recent to join our family. It's a struggle for him to abstain at all. He hasn't had time to grow sensitive to the differences in smell, in flavor. He glanced swiftly at me, his expression apologetic. Sorry, he said. I don't mind. Please don't worry about offending me or frightening me or whichever. That's the way you think. I can understand, or I can try to at least. Just explain however you can. He took a deep breath and gazed at the sky again. So, Jasper wasn't sure if he'd ever come across someone who was as... He hesitated, looking for the right word. Appealing, as you are to me. Which makes me think not. Emmett has been on the wagon longer, so to speak, and he understood what I meant. He says twice, for him, once stronger than the other. And for you? Never. The word hung there for a moment in the warm breeze. What did Emmett do? I asked to break the silence. It was the wrong question to ask. His face grew dark, his hand clenched into a fist inside mine. He looked away. I waited, but he wasn't going to answer. I guess I know, I finally said. He lifted his eyes. His expression was wistful, pleading. Even the strongest of us fall off the wagon, don't we? What are you asking? My permission? My voice was sharper than I'd intended. I tried to make my tone kinder. I could guess what his honesty must cost him. I mean, is there no hope then? How calmly I could discuss my own death. No. He was instantly contrite. Of course there's hope. I mean, of course I won't. He left the sentence hanging. His eyes burned into mine. It's different for us. Emmett, these were strangers he happened across. It was a long time ago, and he wasn't as practiced, as careful as he is now. He fell silent and watched me intently as I thought it through. So if we'd met, in a dark alley or something, I trailed off. It took everything I had not to jump up in the middle of that class full of children, and... He stopped abruptly, looking away. When you walked past me, I could have ruined everything Carlisle's built for us right then and there. If I hadn't been denying my thirst for the last, too many years, I wouldn't have been able to stop myself. He paused, scowling at the trees. He glanced at me grimly, both of us remembering. You must have thought I was possessed. I couldn't understand why. How you could hate me so quickly. To me, it was like you were some kind of demon, summoned straight from my own personal hell to ruin me. The fragrance coming off your skin, I thought it would make me deranged that first day. In that 1 hour, I thought of 100 different ways to lure you from the room with me, to get you alone, and I fought them each back, thinking of my family, what I could do to them. I had to run out to get away before I could speak the words that would make you follow. He looked up then at my staggered expression as I tried to absorb his bitter memories, his golden eyes scorched from under his lashes, hypnotic and deadly. You would have come, he promised. I tried to speak calmly. Without a doubt. He frowned down at my hands, releasing me from the force of his stare. And then, as I tried to rearrange my schedule in a pointless attempt to avoid you, you were there. In that close, warm little room, the scent was maddening. I so very nearly took you then. There was only one other frail human there, so easily dealt with. I shivered in the warm sun, seeing my memories anew through his eyes, only now grasping the danger. Poor Mrs. Cope. I shivered again at how close I'd come to being inadvertently responsible for her death. But I resisted. I don't know how. I forced myself not to wait for you, not to follow you from the school. It was easier outside when I couldn't smell you anywhere. To think clearly, to make the right decision. I left the others near home. I was too ashamed to tell them how weak I was. They only knew something was very wrong. And then I went straight to Carlisle at the hospital to tell him I was leaving. I stared in surprise. I traded cars with him. He had a full tank of gas, and I didn't want to stop. I didn't dare to go home to face Esme. She wouldn't have let me go without a scene. She would have tried to convince me that it wasn't necessary. By the next morning, I was in Alaska. He sounded ashamed, as if admitting a great cowardice. I spent 2 days there with some old acquaintances, but I was homesick. I hated knowing I'd upset Esme and the rest of them, my adopted family. In the pure air of the mountains, it was hard to believe you were so irresistible. I convinced myself it was weak to run away. I'd dealt with temptation before. Not of this magnitude, not even close, but I was strong. Who were you, an insignificant little girl, he grinned suddenly, to chase me from the place I wanted to be? So I came back. He stared off into space. I couldn't speak. I took precautions, hunting, feeding more than usual before seeing you again. I was sure that I was strong enough to treat you like any other human. I was arrogant about it. It was unquestionably a complication that I couldn't simply read your thoughts to know what your reaction was to me. I wasn't used to having to go to such circuitous measures, listening to your words in Jessica's mind. Her mind isn't very original, and it was annoying to have to stoop to that. And then I couldn't know if you really meant what you said. It was all extremely irritating. He frowned at the memory. I wanted you to forget my behavior that first day, if possible, so I tried to talk with you like I would with any person. I was eager, actually, hoping to decipher some of your thoughts. But you were too interesting. I found myself caught up in your expressions, and every now and then you would stir the air with your hand or your hair, and the scent would stun me again. Of course, then, you were nearly crushed to death in front of my eyes. Later, I thought of a perfectly good excuse for why I acted at that moment, because if I hadn't saved you, if your blood had been spilled there in front of me, I don't think I could have stopped myself from exposing us for what we are. But I only thought of that excuse later. At the time, all I could think was, not her. He closed his eyes, lost in his agonized confession. I listened, more eager than rational. Common sense told me I should be terrified. Instead, I was relieved to finally understand, and I was filled with compassion for his suffering, even now, as he confessed his craving to take my life. I finally was able to speak, though my voice was faint. In the hospital? His eyes flashed up to mine. I was appalled. I couldn't believe I had put us in danger after all, put myself in your power, you of all people, as if I needed another motive to kill you. We both flinched as that word slipped out. But it had the opposite effect. He continued quickly. I fought with Rosalie, Emmett, and Jasper when they suggested that now was the time. The worst fight we've ever had. Carlisle sided with me and Alice. He grimaced when he said her name. I couldn't imagine why. Esme told me to do whatever I had to in order to stay. He shook his head indulgently. All that next day, I eavesdropped on the minds of everyone you spoke to, shocked that you kept your word. I didn't understand you at all, but I knew that I couldn't become more involved with you. I did my very best to stay as far from you as possible, and every day the perfume of your skin, your breath, your hair, it hit me as hard as the very first day. He met my eyes again, and they were surprisingly tender. And for all that, he continued, I'd have fared better if I had exposed us all at that first moment than if now, here, with no witnesses and nothing to stop me, I were to hurt you. I was human enough to have to ask, why? Isabella. He pronounced my full name carefully, then playfully ruffled my hair with his free hand. A shock ran through my body at his casual touch. Bella, I couldn't live with myself if I ever hurt you. You don't know how it's tortured me. He looked down, ashamed again. The thought of you, still, white, cold. To never see you blush scarlet again, to never see that flash of intuition in your eyes when you see through my pretenses. It would be unendurable. He lifted his glorious, agonized eyes to mine. You are the most important thing to me now. The most important thing to me ever. My head was spinning at the rapid change in direction our conversation had taken. From the cheerful topic of my impending demise, we were suddenly declaring ourselves. He waited, and even though I looked down to study our hands between us, I knew his golden eyes were on me. You already know how I feel, of course, I finally said. I'm here. Which, roughly translated, means I would rather die than stay away from you. I frowned. I'm an idiot. You are an idiot, he agreed with a laugh. Our eyes met, and I laughed too. We laughed together at the idiocy and sheer impossibility of such a moment. And so the lion fell in love with the lamb, he murmured. I looked away, hiding my eyes as I thrilled to the word. What a stupid lamb, I sighed. What a sick, masochistic lion. He stared into the shadowy forest for a long moment, and I wondered where his thoughts had taken him. Why? I began, and then paused, not sure how to continue. He looked at me and smiled. Sunlight glinted off his face, his teeth. Yes. Tell me why you ran from me before. His smile faded. You know why. No, I mean, exactly what did I do wrong? I'll have to be on my guard, you see, so I better start learning what I shouldn't do. This, for example, I stroked the back of his hand, seems to be all right. He smiled again. You didn't do anything wrong, Bella. It was my fault. But I want to help if I can, to not make this harder for you. Well, he contemplated for a moment. It was just how close you were. Most humans instinctively shy away from us, are repelled by our alienness. I wasn't expecting you to come so close. And the smell of your throat. He stopped short, looking to see if he'd upset me. Okay, then, I said flippantly, trying to alleviate the suddenly tense atmosphere. I tucked my chin. No throat exposure. It worked. He laughed. No, really. It was more the surprise than anything else. He raised his free hand and placed it gently on the side of my neck. I sat very still, the chill of his touch a natural warning. A warning telling me to be terrified. But there was no feeling of fear in me. There were, however, other feelings. You see, he said, perfectly fine. My blood was racing, and I wished I could slow it, sensing that this must make everything so much more difficult, the thudding of my pulse in my veins. Surely he could hear it. The blush on your cheeks is lovely, he murmured. He gently freed his other hand. My hands fell limply into my lap. Softly he brushed my cheek, then held my face between his marble hands. Be very still, he whispered, as if I wasn't already frozen. Slowly, never moving his eyes from mine, he leaned toward me. Then abruptly, but very gently, he rested his cold cheek against the hollow at the base of my throat. I was quite unable to move, even if I'd wanted to. I listened to the sound of his even breathing, watching the sun and wind play in his bronze hair, more human than any other part of him. With deliberate slowness, his hands slid down the sides of my neck. I shivered, and I heard him catch his breath, but his hands didn't pause as they softly moved my shoulders, and then stopped. His face drifted to the side, his nose skimming across my collarbone. He came to rest with the side of his face pressed tenderly against my chest, listening to my heart. Ah, he sighed. I don't know how long we sat without moving. It could have been hours. Eventually, the throb of my pulse quieted, but he didn't move or speak again as he held me. I knew at any moment it could be too much and my life could end, so quickly that I might not even notice. And I couldn't make myself be afraid. I couldn't think of anything except that he was touching me. And then, too soon, he released me. His eyes were peaceful. "It won't be so hard again," he said with satisfaction. "Was that very hard for you?" "Not nearly as bad as I imagined it would be. And you?" "No, it wasn't bad for me." He smiled at my inflection. "You know what I mean." I smiled. "Here." He took my hand and placed it against his cheek. "Do you feel how warm it is?" And it was almost warm, his usually icy skin. But I barely noticed, for I was touching his face, something I'd dreamed of constantly since the first day I'd seen him. "Don't move," I whispered. No one could be still like Edward. He closed his eyes and became as immobile as stone, a carving under my hand. I moved even more slowly than he had, careful not to make one unexpected move. I caressed his cheek, delicately stroked his eyelid, the purple shadow in the hollow under his eye. I traced the shape of his perfect nose, and then, so carefully, his flawless lips. His lips parted under my hand, and I could feel his cool breath on my fingertips. I wanted to lean in to inhale the scent of him, so I dropped my hand and leaned away, not wanting to push him too far. He opened his eyes, and they were hungry. Not in a way to make me fear, but rather to tighten the muscles in the pit of my stomach and send my pulse hammering through my veins again. "I wish," he whispered, "I wish you could feel the complexity, the confusion I feel, that you could understand." He raised his hand to my hair, then carefully brushed it across my face. "Tell me," I breathed. "I don't think I can. I've told you, on the one hand, the hunger, the thirst, that deplorable creature that I am, I feel for you, and I think you can understand that to an extent. Though," he half smiled, "as you are not addicted to any illegal substances, you probably can't empathize completely. But," his fingers touched my lips lightly, making me shiver again, "there are other hungers I don't even understand, that are foreign to me. I may understand that better than you think. I'm not used to feeling so human. Is it always like this? For me?" I paused. "No, never. Never before this." He held my hands between his. They felt so feeble in his iron strength. "I don't know how to be close to you," he admitted. "I don't know if I can." I leaned forward very slowly, cautioning him with my eyes. I placed my cheek against his stone chest. I could hear his breath and nothing else. "This is enough," I sighed, closing my eyes. In a very human gesture, he put his arms around me and pressed his face against my hair. "You're better at this than you give yourself credit for," I noted. "I have human instincts. They may be buried deep, but they're there." We sat like that for another immeasurable moment. I wondered if he could be as unwilling to move as I was. But I could see the light was fading, the shadows of the forest beginning to touch us, and I sighed. "You have to go." "I thought you couldn't read my mind." "It's getting clearer." I could hear a smile in his voice. He took my shoulders and I leant into his face. "Can I show you something?" he asked, sudden excitement flaring in his eyes. "Show me what?" "I'll show you how I travel in the forest." He saw my expression. "Don't worry. You'll be very safe, and we'll get you to your truck much faster." His mouth twitched up into that crooked smile so beautiful my heart nearly stopped. "Will you turn into a bat?" I asked warily. He laughed, louder than I'd ever heard. Like I haven't heard that one before. "Right. I'm sure you get that all the time." "Come on, little coward. Climb on my back." I waited to see if he was kidding, but apparently he meant it. He smiled as he read my hesitation and reached for me. My heart reacted. Even though he couldn't hear my thoughts, my pulse always gave me away. He then proceeded to sling me onto his back with very little effort on my part, besides, when in place, clamping my legs and arms so tightly around him that it would choke a normal person. It was like clinging to a stone. "I'm a bit heavier than your average backpack," I warned. "Ha!" he snorted. I could almost hear his eyes rolling. I'd never seen him in such high spirits before. He startled me, suddenly grabbing my hand, pressing my palm to his face, and inhaling deeply. "Easier all the time," he muttered. And then he was running. If I'd ever feared death before in his presence, it was nothing compared to how I felt now. He streaked through the dark, thick underbrush of the forest like a bullet, like a ghost. There was no sound, no evidence that his feet touched the earth. His breathing never changed, never indicated any effort, but the trees flew by at a deadly speed, always missing us by inches. I was too terrified to close my eyes, though the cool forest air whipped against my face and burned them. I felt as if I were stupidly sticking my head out of the window of an airplane in flight. And, for the first time in my life, I felt the dizzy faintness of motion sickness. Then it was over. We'd hiked hours this morning to reach Edward's meadow, and now, in a matter of minutes, we were back to the truck. Exhilarating, isn't it? His voice was high, excited. He stood motionless, waiting for me to climb down. I tried, but my muscles wouldn't respond. My arms and legs stayed locked around him while my head spun uncomfortably. "Bella?" he asked, anxious now. "I think I need to lie down," I gasped. "Oh, sorry." He waited for me, but I still couldn't move. "I think I need your help," I admitted. He laughed quietly and gently unloosened my stranglehold on his neck. There was no resisting the iron strength of his hands. Then he pulled me around to face him, cradling me in his arms like a small child. He held me for a moment, then carefully placed me on the springy ferns. "How do you feel?" he asked. I couldn't be sure how I felt when my head was spinning so crazily. "Dizzy, I think." "Put your head between your knees." I tried that, and it helped a little. I breathed in and out slowly, keeping my head very still. I felt him sitting beside me. The moments passed, and eventually I found that I could raise my head. There was a hollow ringing sound in my ears. "I guess that wasn't the best idea," he mused. I tried to be positive, but my voice was weak. "No, it was very interesting." "You're as white as a ghost." "No, you're as white as me." I think I should have closed my eyes. Remember that next time. "Next time?" I groaned. He laughed, his mood still radiant. "Show off," I muttered. "Open your eyes, Bella," he said quietly. And he was right there, his face so close to mine. His beauty stunned my mind, and it was too much, an excess I couldn't grow accustomed to. "I was thinking while I was running," he paused, "about not hitting the trees, I hope." "Silly Bella," he chuckled. "Running is second nature to me. It's not something I have to think about." "Show off," I muttered again. He smiled. "No," he continued. "I was thinking there was something I wanted to try." And he took my face in his hands again. I couldn't breathe. He hesitated, not in the normal way, the human way. Not the way a man might hesitate before he kissed a woman, to gauge her reaction, to see how he would be perceived. Perhaps he would hesitate to prolong the moment, that ideal moment of anticipation, sometimes better than the kiss itself. Edward hesitated to test himself, to see if this was safe, to make sure he was still in control of his need. And then his cold, marble lips pressed very softly against mine. What neither of us was prepared for was my response. Blood boiled under my skin, burned in my lips. My breath came in a wild gasp. My fingers knotted in his hair, clutching him to me. My lips parted as I breathed in his heady scent. Immediately I felt him turn to unresponsive stone beneath my lips. His hands gently, but with irresistible force, pushed my face back. I opened my eyes and saw his guarded expression. "Oops," I breathed. "That's an understatement." His eyes were wild, his jaw clenched in acute restraint, yet he didn't lapse from his perfect articulation. He held my face just inches from his. He dazzled my eyes. "Should I?" I tried to disengage myself, to give him some room. His hands refused to let me move so much as an inch. "No, it's tolerable. Wait for a moment, please." His voice was polite, controlled. I kept my eyes on his, watched as the excitement in them faded and gentled. Then he smiled a surprisingly impish grin. "There," he said, obviously pleased with himself. "Tolerable?" I asked. He laughed aloud. "I'm stronger than I thought. It's nice to know." I wish I could say the same. I'm sorry. "You are only human, after all." "Thanks so much," I said, my voice acerbic. He was on his feet in one of his lithe, almost invisibly quick movements. He held out his hand to me, an unexpected gesture. I was so used to our standard of careful non-contact. I took his icy hand, needing the support more than I thought. My balance had not yet returned. "Are you still faint from the run? Or was it my kissing expertise?" How light-hearted, how human he seemed as he laughed now, his seraphic face untroubled. He was a different Edward than the one I had known. I felt all the more besotted by him. It would cause me physical pain to be separated from him now. "I can't be sure. I'm still woozy," I managed to respond. "I think it's some of both, though." "Maybe you should let me drive." "Are you insane?" I protested. "I can drive better than you on your best day," he teased. "You have much slower reflexes." "I'm sure that's true, but I don't think my nerves or my truck could take it." "Some trust, please, Bella." My hand was in my pocket, curled tightly around the key. I pursed my lips, deliberated, then shook my head with a tight grin. "Nope, not a chance." He raised his eyebrows in disbelief. I started to step around him, heading for the driver's side. He might have let me pass if I hadn't wobbled slightly. Then again, he might not have. His arm created an inescapable snare around my waist. "Bella, I've already expended a great deal of personal effort at this point to keep you alive. I'm not about to let you behind the wheel of a vehicle when you can't even walk straight. Besides, friends don't let friends drive drunk," he quoted with a chuckle. I could smell the unbearably sweet fragrance coming off his chest. "Drunk?" I objected. "You're intoxicated by my very presence." He was grinning that playful smirk again. "I can't argue with that," I sighed. There was no way around it. I couldn't resist him in anything. I held the key high and dropped it, watching his hand flash like lightning to catch it soundlessly. "Take it easy. My truck is a senior citizen." "Very sensible," he approved. "And are you not affected at all?" I asked, irked by my presence. Again, his mobile features transformed. His expression became soft, warm. He didn't answer at first. He simply bent his face to mine and brushed his lips slowly along my jaw, from my ear to my chin, back and forth. I trembled. "Regardless," he finally murmured, "I have better reflexes." Chapter 14. Mind over matter. He could drive well when he kept the speed reasonable, I had to admit. Like so many things, it seemed to be effortless to him. He barely looked at the road, yet the tires never deviated so much as a centimeter from the center of the lane. He drove one-handed, holding my hand on the seat. Sometimes he gazed into the setting sun, sometimes he glanced at me, my face, my hair blowing out the open window, our hands twined together. He had turned the radio to an oldie station, and he sang along with a song I'd never heard. He knew every line. "You like 50s music?" I asked. Music in the 50s was good. Much better than the 60s or the 70s. Ugh. He shuddered. The 80s were bearable. "Are you going to tell me how old you are?" I asked, tentative, not wanting to upset his buoyant humor. "Does it matter much?" His smile, to my relief, remained unclouded. "No, but I still wonder." I grimaced. "There's nothing like an unsolved mystery to keep you up at night." "I wonder if it will upset you." He reflected to himself. He gazed into the sun. The minutes passed. "Try me," I finally said. He sighed and then looked into my eyes, seeming to forget the road completely for a time. Whatever he saw there must have encouraged him. He looked into the sun. The light of the setting orb glittered off his skin in ruby-tinged sparkles, and spoke. "I was born in Chicago in 1901. He paused and glanced at me from the corner of his eyes. My face was carefully unsurprised, patient for the rest. He smiled a tiny smile and continued. "Carlisle found me in a hospital in the summer of 1918. I was 17 and dying of the Spanish influenza." He heard my intake of breath, though it was barely audible to my own ears. He looked down into my eyes again. "I don't remember it well. It was a very long time ago, and human memories fade." He was lost in his thoughts for a short time before he went on. "I do remember how it felt when Carlisle saved me. It's not an easy thing, not something you could forget." "Your parents?" "They had already died from the disease. I was alone. That was why he chose me. In all the chaos of the epidemic, no one would ever realize I was gone." "How did he save you?" A few seconds passed before he answered. He seemed to choose his words carefully. "It was difficult. Not many of us have the restraint necessary to accomplish it, but Carlyle has always been the most humane, the most compassionate of us. I don't think you could find his equal throughout all of history." He paused. For me, it was merely very, very painful. I could tell from the set of his lips he would say no more on this subject. I suppressed my curiosity, though it was far from idle. There were many things I needed to think through on this particular issue, things that were only beginning to occur to me. No doubt his quick mind had already comprehended every aspect that eluded me. His soft voice interrupted my thoughts. He acted from loneliness. That's usually the reason behind the choice. I was the first in Carlyle's family, though he found Esme soon after. She fell from a cliff. They brought her straight to the hospital morgue, though, somehow, her heart was still beating. "So, you must be dying, then, to become—" We never said the word, and I couldn't frame it now. "No, that's just Carlyle. He would never do that to someone who had another choice." The respect in his voice was profound whenever he spoke of his father figure. "It is easier, he says, though," he continued, "if the blood is weak." He looked at the now dark road, and I could feel the subject closing again. "And Emmett and Rosalie?" "Carlyle brought Rosalie to our family next. I didn't realize till much later that he was hoping she would be to me what Esme was to him. He was careful with his thoughts around me." He rolled his eyes. "But she was never more than a sister. It was only 2 years later that she found Emmett. She was hunting. We were in Appalachia at the time, and found a bear about to finish him off. She carried him back to Carlisle more than 100 miles, afraid she wouldn't be able to do it herself. I'm only beginning to guess how difficult that journey was for her." He threw a pointed glance in my direction and raised our hands, still folded together, to brush my cheek with the back of his hand. "But she made it," I encouraged, looking away from the unbearable beauty of his eyes. "Yes," he murmured. "She saw something in his face that made her strong enough, and they've been together ever since. Sometimes they live separately from us, as a married couple, but the younger we pretend to be, the longer we can stay in any given place. Forks seemed perfect, so we all enrolled in high school." He laughed. "I suppose we'll have to go to their wedding in a few years, again." "Alice and Jasper?" "Alice and Jasper are two very rare creatures. They both developed a conscience, as we refer to it, with no outside guidance. Jasper belonged to another family, a very different kind of family. He became depressed, and he wandered on his own. Alice found him. Like me, she has certain gifts above and beyond the norm for our kind." "Really?" I interrupted, fascinated. "But you said you were the only one who could hear people's thoughts." "That's true. She knows other things. She sees things that might happen, things that are coming. But it's very subjective. The future isn't set in stone. Things change." His jaw set when he said that, and his eyes darted to my face in a way so quickly that I wasn't sure if I only imagined it. "What kinds of things does she see?" "She saw Jasper and knew that he was looking for her before he knew it himself. She saw Carlyle and our family, and they came together to find us. She's most sensitive to non-humans. She always sees, for example, when another group of our kind is coming near, and any threat they may pose." "Are there a lot of your kind?" I was surprised. How many of them could walk among us undetected? "No, not many. But most won't settle in any one place. Only those like us who've given up hunting you people," a sly glance in my direction, "can live together with humans for any length of time. We've only found one other family like ours, in a small village in Alaska. We lived together for a time, but there were so many of us that we became too noticeable. Those of us who live differently tend to band together." "And the others?" "Nomads, for the most part. We've all lived that way at times. It gets tedious, like anything else, but we run across the others now and then, because most of us prefer the north." "Why's that?" We were parked in front of my house now, and he'd turned off the truck. It was very quiet and dark. There was no moon. The porch light was off, so I knew my father wasn't home yet. "Did you have your eyes open this afternoon?" he teased. "Do you think I could walk down the street in the sunlight without causing traffic accidents? There's a reason why we chose the Olympic Peninsula, one of the most sunless places in the world. It's nice to be able to go outside in the day. You wouldn't believe how tired you can get of nighttime in 80-odd years." "So, that's where the legends come from?" "Probably. And Alice came from another family, like Jasper? No, and that is a mystery. Alice doesn't remember her human life at all, and she doesn't know who created her. She awoke alone. Whoever made her walked away, and none of us understand why, or how he could. If she hadn't had that other sense, if she hadn't seen Jasper and Carlisle, known that she would someday become one of us, she probably would have turned into a total savage. There was so much to think through, so much I still wanted to ask, but, to my great embarrassment, my stomach growled. I'd been so intrigued I hadn't even noticed I was hungry. I realized now that I was ravenous. I'm sorry. I'm keeping you from dinner. I'm fine, really. I've never spent much time around anyone who eats food. I forget. I want to stay with you. It was easier to say in the darkness, knowing as I spoke how my voice would betray me, my hopeless addiction to him. Can't I come in? He asked. Would you like to? I couldn't picture it, this godlike creature sitting in my father's shabby kitchen chair. Yes, if it's all right. I heard the door close quietly, and almost simultaneously he was outside my door, opening it for me. Very human, I complimented him. It's definitely resurfacing. He walked beside me in the night, so quietly I had to peek at him constantly to be sure he was still there. In the darkness he looked much more normal. Still pale, still dreamlike in his beauty, but no longer the fantastic sparkling creature of our sunlit afternoon. He reached the door ahead of me and opened it for me. I paused halfway through the frame. The door was unlocked? No, I used the key from under the eave. I stepped inside, flicked on the porch light, and turned to look at him with my eyebrows raised. I was sure I'd never used that key in front of him. I was curious about you. You spied on me? But somehow I couldn't infuse my voice with the proper outrage. I was flattered. He was unrepentant. What else is there to do at night? I let it go for the moment and went down the hall to the kitchen. He was there before me, needing no guide. He sat in the very chair I'd tried to picture him in. His beauty lit up the kitchen. It was a moment before I could look away. I concentrated on getting my dinner, taking last night's lasagna from the fridge, placing a square on a plate, heating it in the microwave. It revolved, filling the kitchen with the smell of tomatoes and oregano. I didn't take my eyes from the plate of food as I spoke. How often? I asked casually. He sounded as if I had pulled him from some other train of thought. I still didn't turn around. How often did you come here? I come here almost every night. I whirled, stunned. Why? You're interesting when you sleep. He spoke matter-of-factly. You talk. No, I gasped, heat flooding my face all the way to my hairline. I gripped the kitchen counter for support. I knew I talked in my sleep, of course. My mother teased me about it. I hadn't thought it was something I needed to worry about here, though. His expression shifted instantly to chagrin. Are you very angry with me? That depends. I felt and sounded like I'd had the breath knocked out of me. He waited. On, he urged. What you heard, I wailed. Instantly, silently, he was at my side, taking my hands carefully in his. Don't be upset, he pleaded. He dropped his face to the level of my eyes, holding my gaze. I was embarrassed. I tried to look away. You miss your mother, he whispered. You worry about her, and when it rains, the sound makes you restless. You used to talk about home a lot, but it's less often now. Once you said, it's too green. He laughed softly, hoping, I could see, not to offend me further. Anything else? I demanded. He knew what I was getting at. You did say my name, he admitted. I sighed in defeat. A lot? How much do you mean by a lot, exactly? Oh no. I hung my head. He pulled me against his chest, softly, naturally. Don't be self-conscious, he whispered in my ear. If I could dream at all, it would be about you, and I'm not ashamed of it. Then we both heard the sound of tires on the brick driveway, saw the headlights flash through the front windows down the hall to us. I stiffened in his arms. Should your father know I'm here? He asked. I'm not sure. I tried to think it through quickly. Another time, then. And I was alone. Edward, I hissed. I heard a ghostly chuckle, then nothing else. My father's key turned in the door. Bella? He called. It had bothered me before. Who else would it be? Suddenly, he didn't seem so far off base. In here. I hoped he couldn't hear the hysterical edge to my voice. I grabbed my dinner from the microwave and sat at the table as he walked in. His footsteps sounded so noisy after my day with Edward. Can you give me some of that? I'm bushed. He stepped on the heels of his boots to take them off, holding the back of Edward's chair for support. I took my food with me, scarfing it down as I got his dinner. It burned my tongue. I filled 2 glasses with milk while his lasagna was heating, and gulped mine to put out the fire. As I set the glass down, I noticed the milk trembling and realized my hand was shaking. Charlie sat in the chair, and the contrast between him and its former occupant was comical. Thanks, he said as I placed his food on the table. How was your day? I asked. The words were rushed. I was dying to escape to my room. Good. The fish were biting. How about you? Did you get everything done that you wanted to? Not really. It was too nice out to stay indoors. I took another big bite. It was a nice day, he agreed. What an understatement, I thought to myself. Finished with the last bite of lasagna, I lifted my glass and chugged the remains of my milk. Charlie surprised me by being observant. In a hurry? Yeah, I'm tired. I'm going to bed early. You look kind of keyed up, he noted. Why, oh why, did this have to be his night to pay attention? Do I? Was all I could manage in response. I quickly scrubbed my dishes clean in the sink and placed them upside down on a dish towel to dry. It's Saturday, he mused. I didn't respond. No plans tonight? He asked suddenly. No, Dad, I just want to get some sleep. None of the boys in town your type, eh? He was suspicious, but trying to play it cool. No, none of the boys have caught my eye yet. I was careful not to overemphasize the word boys in my quest to be truthful with Charlie. I thought maybe that Mike Newton. You said he was friendly. He's just a friend, Dad. Well, you're too good for them all anyway. Wait till you get to college to start looking. Every father's dream, that his daughter will be out of the house before the hormones kick in. Sounds like a good idea to me, I agreed as I headed up the stairs. Night, honey, he called after me. No doubt he would be listening carefully all evening, waiting for me to try to sneak out. See you in the morning, Dad. See you creeping into my room tonight at midnight to check on me. I worked to make my tread sound slow and tired as I walked up the stairs to my room. I shut the door loud enough for him to hear, and then sprinted on my tiptoes to the window. I threw it open and leaned out into the night. My eyes scanned the darkness, the impenetrable shadow of the trees. Edward, I whispered, feeling completely idiotic. The quiet, laughing response came from behind me. Yes? I whirled, one hand flying to my throat in surprise. He lay, smiling hugely, across my bed, his hands behind his head, his feet dangling off the end, the picture of ease. Oh, I breathed, sinking unsteadily to the floor. I'm sorry. He pressed his lips together, trying to hide his amusement. Just give me a minute to restart my heart. He sat up slowly, so as not to startle me again. Then he leaned forward and reached out with his long arms to pick me up, gripping the tops of my arms like I was a toddler. He sat me on the bed beside him. Why don't you sit with me? He suggested, putting a cold hand on mine. How's the heart? You tell me. I'm sure you hear it better than I do. I felt his quiet laughter shake the bed. We sat there for a moment in silence, both listening to my heartbeat slow. I thought about having Edward in my room, with my father in the house. Can I have a minute to be human? I asked. Certainly. He gestured with one hand that I should proceed. Stay, I said, trying to look severe. Yes, ma'am. And he made a show of becoming a statue on the edge of my bed. I hopped up, grabbing my pajamas from off the floor, my bag of toiletries off the desk. I left the light off and slipped out, closing the door. I could hear the sound from the TV rising up the stairs. I banged the bathroom door loudly so Charlie wouldn't come up to bother me. I meant to hurry. I brushed my teeth fiercely, trying to be thorough and speedy, removing all traces of lasagna, but the hot water of the shower couldn't be rushed. It unknotted the muscles in my back, calmed my pulse. The familiar smell of my shampoo made me feel like I might be the same person I had been this morning. I tried not to think of Edward, sitting in my room, waiting, because then I had to start all over with the calming process. Finally, I couldn't delay anymore. I shut off the water, toweling hastily, rushing again. I pulled on my holey t-shirt and gray sweatpants. Too late to regret not packing the Victoria's Secret silk pajamas my mother got me 2 birthdays ago, which still had the tags on them in a drawer somewhere back home. I rubbed the towel through my hair again, and then yanked the brush through it quickly. I threw the towel in the hamper, flung my brush and toothpaste into my bag. Then I dashed down the stairs so Charlie could see that I was in my pajamas, with wet hair. "Night, Dad." "Night, Bella." He did look startled by my appearance. Maybe that would keep him from checking on me tonight. I took the stairs 2 at a time, trying to be quiet, and flew into my room, closing the door tightly behind me. Edward hadn't moved a fraction of an inch. A carving of Adonis perched on my faded quilt. I smiled, and his lips twitched, the statue coming to life. His eyes appraised me, taking in the damp hair, the tattered shirt. He raised one eyebrow. "Nice." I grimaced. "No, it looks good on you." "Thanks," I whispered. I went back to his side, sitting cross-legged beside him. I looked at the lines in the wooden floor. "What was all that for?" "Charlie thinks I'm sneaking out." "Oh." He contemplated that. "Why?" As if he couldn't know Charlie's mind much more clearly than I could guess. "Apparently I look a little overexcited." He lifted my chin, examining my face. "You look very warm, actually." He bent his face slowly to mine, laying his cool cheek against my skin. I held perfectly still. He breathed. It was very difficult, while he was touching me, to frame a coherent question. It took me a minute of scattered concentration to begin. "It seems to be much easier for you, now, to be close to me." "Does it seem that way to you?" he murmured, his nose gliding to the corner of my jaw. I felt his hand, lighter than a moth's wing, brushing my damp hair back, so that his lips could touch the hollow beneath my ear. Much easier," I said, trying to exhale. "So I was wondering—" I began again, but his fingers were slowly tracing my collarbone, and I lost my train of thought. "Yes," he breathed. "Why is that?" My voice shook, embarrassing me. "Do you think—" I felt the tremor of his breath on my neck as he laughed. "Mind over matter." I pulled back. As I moved, he froze, and I could no longer hear the sound of his breathing. We stared cautiously at each other for a moment, and then, as his clenched jaw gradually relaxed, his expression became puzzled. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, the opposite. You're driving me crazy," I explained. He considered that briefly, and when he spoke, he sounded pleased. "Really?" A triumphant smile slowly lit his face. "Would you like a round of applause?" I asked sarcastically. He grinned. "I'm just pleasantly surprised," he clarified. "In the last 100 years or so," his voice was teasing, "I never imagined anything like this. I didn't believe I would ever find someone I wanted to be with, in another way than my brothers and sisters. And then to find, even though it's all new to me, that I'm good at it, at being with you." "You're good at everything," I pointed out. He shrugged, allowing that, and we both laughed in whispers. "But how can it be so easy now?" I pressed. "This afternoon—" "It's not easy," he sighed. "But this afternoon I was still undecided. I am sorry about that. It was unforgivable for me to behave so." "Not unforgivable," I disagreed. "Thank you." He smiled. "You see," he continued, looking down now, "I wasn't sure if I was strong enough." He picked up one of my hands and pressed it lightly to his face, and while there was still that possibility that I might be overcome, he breathed in the scent at my wrist. I was susceptible, until I made up my mind that I was strong enough, that there were no possibility at all that I ever could. I'd never seen him struggle so hard for words. It was so human. "So there's no possibility now?" "Mind over matter," he repeated, smiling, his teeth bright even in the darkness. "Well, that was easy," I said. He threw back his head and laughed, quietly as a whisper, but still exuberantly. "Easy for you," he amended, touching my nose with his fingertip, and then his face was abruptly serious. "I'm trying," he whispered, his voice pained. "If it gets to be too much, I'm fairly sure I'll be able to leave." I scowled. I didn't like the talk of leaving. "And it will be harder tomorrow," he continued. I've had the scent of you in my head all day, and I've grown amazingly desensitized. If I'm away from you for any length of time, I'll have to start over again. Not quite from scratch, though, I think. Don't go away, then, I responded, unable to hide the longing in my voice. That suits me, he replied, his face relaxing into a gentle smile. Bring on the shackles. I'm your prisoner. But his long hands formed manacles around my wrist as he spoke. He laughed his quiet, musical laugh. He'd laughed more tonight than I'd ever heard in all the time I'd spent with him. You seem more optimistic than usual, I observed. I haven't seen you like this before. Isn't it supposed to be like this? He smiled. The glory of first love and all that. It's incredible, isn't it? The difference between reading about something, seeing it in the pictures, and experiencing it. Very different, I agreed. More forceful than I'd imagined. For example, his words flowed swiftly now. I had to concentrate to catch it all. The emotion of jealousy. I've read about it 100,000 times, seen actors portrayed in 1,000 different plays and movies. I believed I understood that one pretty clearly, but it shocked me. He grimaced. Do you remember the day that Mike asked you to the dance? I nodded, though I remembered that day for a different reason. The day you started talking to me again. I was surprised by the flare of resentment, almost fury that I felt. I didn't recognize what it was at first. I was even more aggravated than usual that I couldn't know what you were thinking, why you refused him. Was it simply for your friend's sake? Was there someone else? I knew I had no right to care either way. I tried not to care. And then the lines started forming. He chuckled. I scowled in the darkness. I waited, unreasonably anxious to hear what you would say to them, to watch your expressions. I couldn't deny the relief I felt watching the annoyance on your face, but I couldn't be sure. That was the first night I came here. I wrestled all night while watching you sleep with the chasm between what I knew was right, moral, ethical, and what I wanted. I knew that if I continued to ignore you as I should, or if I left for a few years till you were gone, that someday you would say yes to Mike or someone like him. It made me angry. And then, he whispered, as you were sleeping, you said my name. You spoke so clearly. At first I thought you'd woken, but you rolled over restlessly and mumbled my name once more, and sighed. The feeling that coursed through me then was unnerving, staggering, and I knew I couldn't ignore you any longer. He was silent for a moment, probably listening to the suddenly uneven pounding of my heart. But jealousy. It's a strange thing, so much more powerful than I would have thought. And irrational. Just now, when Charlie asked you about that vile Mike Newton, he shook his head angrily. I should have known you'd be listening, I groaned. Of course. That made you feel jealous, though? Really? I'm new at this. You're resurrecting the human in me, and everything feels stronger because it's fresh. But honestly, I teased, for that to bother you, after I have to hear that Rosalie, the incarnation of pure beauty, Rosalie, was meant for you. Emmett or no Emmett, how can I compete with that? There's no competition. His teeth gleamed. He drew my trapped hands around his back, holding me to his chest. I kept as still as I could, even breathing with caution. I know there's no competition, I mumbled into his cold skin. That's the problem. Of course, Rosalie is beautiful in her way, but even if she wasn't like a sister to me, even if Emmett didn't belong with her, she could never have 1/10, no, 1/100th of the attraction you hold for me. He was serious now, thoughtful. For almost 90 years I've walked among my kind, and yours, all the time thinking I was complete in myself, not realizing what I was seeking, and not finding anything, because you weren't alive yet. It hardly seems fair, I whispered, my face still resting on his chest, listening to his breath come and go. I haven't had to wait at all. Why should I get off so easily? You're right, he agreed with amusement. I should make this harder for you, definitely. He freed one of his hands, released my wrist, only to gather it carefully onto his other hand. He stroked my wet hair softly, from the top of my head to my waist. You only have to risk your life every second you spend with me. That's surely not much. You only have to turn your back on nature, on humanity. What's that worth? Very little. I don't feel deprived of anything. Not yet. And his voice was abruptly full of ancient grief. I tried to pull back to look in his face, but his hand locked my wrist in an unbreakable hold. What? I started to ask when his body became alert. I froze, but he suddenly released my hands and disappeared. I narrowly avoided falling on my face. Lie down, he hissed. I couldn't tell where he spoke from in the darkness. I rolled under my quilt, balling up on my side, the way I usually slept. I heard the door crack open as Charlie peeked in to make sure I was where I was supposed to be. I breathed evenly, exaggerating the movement. A long minute passed. I listened, not sure if I'd heard the door close. Then Edward's cool arm was around me, under the covers, his lips at my ear. You are a terrible actress. I'd say that career path is out for you. Darn it, I muttered. My heart was crashing in my chest. He hummed a melody I didn't recognize. It sounded like a lullaby. He paused. Should I sing you to sleep? Right, I laughed, like I could sleep with you here. You do it all the time, he reminded me. But I didn't know you were here, I replied icily. So if you don't want to sleep, he suggested, ignoring my tone. My breath caught. If I don't want to sleep. He chuckled. What do you want to do then? I couldn't answer at first. I'm not sure, I finally said. Tell me when you decide. I could feel his cool breath on my neck, feel his nose sliding along my jaw, inhaling. I thought you were desensitized. Just because I'm resisting the wine doesn't mean I can't appreciate the bouquet, he whispered. You have a very floral smell, like lavender. Or freesia, he noted. It's mouth-watering. Yeah, it's an off day when I don't get somebody telling me how edible I smell. He chuckled, and then sighed. I've decided what I want to do, I told him. I want to hear more about you. Ask me anything. I sifted through my questions for the most vital. Why do you do it? I said. I still don't understand how you can work so hard to resist what you are. Please don't misunderstand. Of course, I'm glad that you do. I just don't see why you would bother in the first place. He hesitated before answering. That's a good question, and you are not the first one to ask it. The others, the majority of our kind, who are quite content with our lot, they too wonder at how we live. But you see, just because we've been dealt a certain hand, it doesn't mean that we can't choose to rise above, to conquer the boundaries of a destiny that none of us wanted, to try to retain whatever essential humanity we can. I lay unmoving, locked in odd silence. Did you fall asleep? He whispered after a few minutes. No. Is that all you were curious about? I rolled my eyes. Not quite. What else do you want to know? Why can you read minds? Why only you? And Alice, seeing the future. Why does that happen? I felt him shrug in the darkness. We don't really know. Carlyle has a theory. He believes that we all bring something of our strongest human traits with us into the next life, where they are intensified, like our minds and our senses. He thinks that I must have already been very sensitive to the thoughts of those around me, and that Alice had some precognition, wherever she was. What did he bring into the next life, and the others? Carlyle brought his compassion. Esme brought her ability to love passionately. Emmett brought his strength. Rosalie her tenacity, or you could call it her pig-headedness. He chuckled. Jasper's very interesting. He was quite charismatic in his first life, able to influence those around him to see things his way. Now he is able to manipulate the emotions of those around him. Calm down a room of angry people, for example, or excite a lethargic crowd, conversely. It's a very subtle gift. I considered the impossibilities he described, trying to take it in. He waited patiently while I thought. So where did it all start? I mean, Carlyle changed you, and then someone must have changed him, and so on. Well, where did you come from? Evolution? Creation? Couldn't we have evolved in the same way as other species, predator and prey? Or, if you don't believe that all this world could have just happened on its own, which is hard for me to accept myself, is it so hard to believe that the same force that created the delicate angelfish with the shark The baby seal and the killer whale could create both our kinds together. Let me get this straight. I'm the baby seal, right? Right. He laughed, and something touched my hair. His lips. I wanted to turn toward him to see if it was really his lips against my hair, but I had to be good. I didn't want to make this any harder for him than it already was. Are you ready to sleep? He asked, interrupting the short silence. Or do you have any more questions? Only a million or two. We have tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, he reminded me. I smiled, euphoric at the thought. Are you sure you won't vanish in the morning? I wanted this to be certain. You are mythical, after all. I won't leave you. His voice had the seal of a promise in it. One more, then, tonight. And I blushed. The darkness was no help. I'm sure he could feel the sudden warmth under my skin. What is it? No, forget it. I changed my mind. Bella, you can ask me anything. I didn't answer, and he groaned. I keep thinking it will get less frustrating not hearing your thoughts, but it just gets worse and worse. I'm glad you can't read my thoughts. It's bad enough that you eavesdropping on my sleeve talking. Please. His voice was so persuasive, so impossible to resist. I shook my head. If you don't tell me, I'll just assume it's something much worse than it is, he threatened darkly. Please. Again, that pleading voice. Well, I began, glad that he couldn't see my face. Yes. You said that Rosalie and Emmett will get married soon. Is that marriage the same as it is for humans? He laughed in earnest now, understanding. Is that what you're getting at? I fidgeted, unable to answer. Yes, I suppose it is much the same, he said. I told you, most of those human desires are there, just hidden behind more powerful desires. Oh, was all I could say. Was there a purpose behind your curiosity? Well, I did wonder about you and me someday. He was instantly serious. I could tell by the sudden stillness of his body. I froze, too, reacting automatically. I don't think that would be possible for us. Because it would be too hard for you if you were that close? That's certainly a problem, but that's not what I was thinking of. It's just that you are so soft, so fragile. I have to mind my actions every moment that we're together so that I don't hurt you. I could kill you quite easily, Bella, simply by accident. His voice had become just a soft murmur. He moved his icy palm to rest it against my cheek. If I was too hasty, if for 1 second I wasn't paying enough attention, I could reach out, meaning to touch your face and crush your skull by mistake. You don't realize how incredibly breakable you are. I can never afford to lose any kind of control when I'm with you. He waited for me to respond, growing anxious when I didn't. Are you scared? He asked. I waited for a minute to answer, so the words would be true. No, I'm fine. He seemed to deliberate for a moment. I'm curious now, though, he said, his voice light again. Have you ever? He trailed off suggestively. Of course not, I flushed. I told you I've never felt like this about anyone before, not even close. I know. It's just that I know other people's thoughts. I know love and lust don't always keep the same company. They do for me. Now, anyway, that they exist for me at all, I sighed. That's nice. We have that one thing in common, at least. He sounded satisfied. Your human instincts, I began. He waited. Well, do you find me attractive in that way at all? He laughed and lightly rumpled my nearly dry hair. I may not be a human, but I am a man, he assured me. I yawned involuntarily. I've answered your questions. Now you should sleep, he insisted. I'm not sure if I can. Do you want me to leave? No, I said too loudly. He laughed and then began to hum that same unfamiliar lullaby, the voice of an archangel, soft in my ear. more tired than I realized, exhausted from the long day of mental and emotional stress like I'd never felt before. I drifted to sleep in his cold arms. And that's where we're going to leave off for today. Thank you all so much for joining me for this first return back to What a Book. I've really missed doing these, and it's been a real long time since I've had the opportunity to. So I'm glad that I get the chance to return and finish out Twilight and do some other books going forward. I've got a sea of options and choices in front of me and things that I want to do. If anyone's curious about what a book is going to look like going forward, make sure to go and check out that video that was posted. There's either one or two. I don't know at the time of reading and recording this. But thank you all so much for listening. I've been Matthew Allen, and I'll see you all next time.